friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Amelia and today is October 31st or November 1st for you, which of course means that another month is done, another month's reading is complete. So we're gonna go into my reading journal and pull out the spreads for my October reads, as well as talk about what I thought about them. I had a pretty good reading month this month. I actually managed to read, I think it was 3,311 pages, which is quite good because last month I think I was more around like 1,600, which obviously wasn't super ideal. So we're back up to a more substantial amount of reading, and that was mostly due to the amount of Robin Hobb that I read this month. Like, I finished Golden Fool, which apparently I realized that I did the spread for that in my September reading journal, but I didn't finish it until October, so I don't know how I messed that up. But I finished Golden Fool and Fool's Fate, as well as Dragon Keeper and Dragon Haven, and 2 other books. So there was a lot of Hobb, and her books tend to be kind of long, so that kind of amounts for the number of pages, while I only read 6 books. So there will be a lot of Hobb to talk about. And yeah, I think that is all the kind of preamble that we need to cover. So let's go ahead and jump into my reading journal and talk about everything I read this month. All right, welcome back to my reading journal. So the first book that I read this month was Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, and I gave this one 4.5 stars. I listened to it on audiobook, and it's like a nonfiction book that's about like the history of the development of Homo sapiens from our earliest beginnings in like the breadbasket of Africa to our spread across the whole planet. And so for the spread for this one, I figured what could be more fitting than a little Homo sapiens skeleton, and it also fits in with my theme, so that worked out very well for me that I read this book this month. I kind of made his skull too small, but you know, it's fine. Maybe he's just not that smart. I don't know. But yeah, as I said, I listened to this one on audiobook, and it was a really enjoyable audiobook. I think it was a pretty good way to digest the information. And I would say that, like, considering the span of human history, the book and Harari did an amazing job of presenting the information in a really digestible and enjoyable way. And I liked how he presented all of the like different opinions of prehistory, since there's no written records, obviously, so there could be more than one way to interpret the available like information. Like, for example, in more than one case, it has been that like Homo sapiens arrived at a new continent. So this happened in Africa, Australia, as well as North America, where they arrived, and then suspiciously exactly on that timeline, the large like megafauna went extinct. And so there are some people's opinions that it was like some sort of climate change, even though there's not like, in Australia at least, not like a huge record of a large climate change around that time. And then in North America, it was kind of, I believe, the ending of the Ice Age, but these creatures had been around through other ice ages, I believe. So he presents that sort of opinion that it was like a climate thing, but then he's also just like, well, I mean, like, if you look at it, it does seem oddly suspicious that twice, as soon as Homo sapiens rocked up on the scene, all the large megafauna just mysteriously went extinct. So it's pretty likely that we had something to do with that, especially when it's large edible animals that don't know to be afraid of us. So, I mean, if you were not a megafauna, if you were an hunter-gatherer and there was a large snack that wasn't afraid of you, I bet you would eat a lot of those snacks. So, you know, it does kind of make sense that those two things would line up and that it would be kind of our fault. So sorry about that, giant ground sloths. We may have eaten all of you, but I don't know. That's just the way of the world, I guess. But I liked that he explored all like the possible options while giving his own opinion and then sort of like backing it up with his interpretation of the evidence. And overall, I think that the information was summarized and presented in a really good way, as I mentioned, and I really enjoy this kind of topic of like pre-human history and sort of learning where we came from and all that thing. I think it's very fascinating. But the spread is pretty much finished, just kind of filling it in. And then I think I do go in with a sort of like kind of beigey off-white that's really pale and fill in all of the skeleton as well as the leaves in like a darker green. I know for the cover page and the pages red that I used gray for the leaves, but I just felt like that would make the spread like, I don't know, I felt like it needed like at least a little bit of color, so I ended up choosing to make the leaves like a kind of, I don't know how to describe this green. It's kind of like almost like low saturation. Like it's not super warm, but it's not super cool either. It's just kind of like a neutrally green, I guess that I would say. And then as I typically sort of do, I just kind of use the font that was on the cover of the actual book to make my title here. And then I haven't written in the star rating yet, but I rated it 4.5 stars. I think I might have said that already, but oh well. But yeah, here I am coloring in the skeleton, and I'm just using the Crayola Colors of the World marker. And then for the leaves, I am actually going to use one of my Tombos. So this is color number 192 in the dual tip brush pens that everybody in bullet journaling YouTube used to use and still probably does for the most part. But yeah, that is pretty much all that I have for the spread, just finishing in the last few leaves. And then we will be turning over the page. And the spread, initially I was thinking, as I mentioned earlier, that I had read Golden Fool this month, and so I was going to do like a 2-page spread with both of them together. So I had like dragon wing bones going across and the banner as well. But then I realized that Golden Fool I had written about last month, so this ends up being for Fool's Fate and then 9th house. So the dragon wing doesn't specifically make sense for 9th house, but I think it's fine. I mean, it kind of maybe makes sense. Like, I mean, maybe not specifically that it's a dragon wing, but like bones, you know, fits the vibe of that book. But as for Fool's Fate, I gave it 4.5 stars, and I would definitely say that it's much more of a return to form for Hobb after Golden Fool. The pace definitely picks up quite a bit, and we move on from like the 100% political events of Golden Fool, and we get a lot more action. And that was definitely one of my bigger complaints with like Golden Fool is I like politics and like character driven stuff, but it was just like so intense that like nothing really actually happened. And then it was also that Fitz was kind of just being annoying and ruining all his relationships. But in this film we get him sort of reconciling a bit with the Fool, and then we have the whole dragon storyline and the conflict between our characters, so like Fitz and everybody else, about what they should do with the dragon. And I felt that was kind of a really interesting plot point, and you could really feel Fitz's like inner turmoil about the draw from the Fool on one hand, who's like his greatest friend and they've been together through so many things, and the Fool wants him to save the dragon and set the world on its new course, as he does. And then the Farseers wanted to do another, because obviously Prince Dutiful is supposed to be retrieving this dragon's head to win his bride's hand in marriage. So he's kind of being pulled between his two great loyalties, because he's always been obviously very loyal to the Farseers, but the Fool has a special place in Fitz's heart. And I was really glad to see Fitz and the Fool's like relationship mend and get to see them interact with each other again. We had some really intense and heartbreaking scenes, and honestly the end kind of felt so tragic. Like, my boy Fitz really went through it, and in this trilogy specifically, I mean, he really goes through it in all of his books, but this trilogy was just kind of like, well, obviously we had a huge tragedy in the first book and then another in this book, so, but it is kind of interesting. I can't really say too much about it without spoiling other things, but I'm glad that he kind of got back something that he lost in the original trilogy, and that his future seems to be set up to be a lot more bright and I mean, I have already read the final trilogy, so I do sort of know where his life goes, but I really appreciated the kind of hopeful end of this one, and seeing Fitz go off into a life that will hopefully finally bring him some joy, because my boy deserves it. He has been through the absolute ringer. And then in terms of coloring for this one, keeping it pretty much the same as the last spread, with the same sort of off-white beigey color for the bones, and then the same banner color from the front, and then just the same Tombow to fill in the leaves. That's 192. Alright, moving on to Ninth House by Lee Bardugo. So I actually gave this one 5 stars, and I wasn't totally sure if I should give it 5 stars, but it did leave me with that feeling that, like, once I finished it, I was like, oh my god, I want to go buy the next one right now. And I feel like when a book leaves you with that feeling, then you know, like, okay, I definitely really enjoyed this because I'm, like, desperate to continue the story. And I definitely liked Ninth House more than I thought I was going to. It was extremely dark and graphic, which I didn't necessarily expect. However, I think for the most part, Bardugo handled the subject matter quite well, and the, like, dark parts didn't come across as, like, gratuitous or for shock factor. Alex, she does fall a little bit into, like, the strong female character kind of role, but I do think that she has more depth than that, and that she's set up to, like, continue to develop in the sequel. And I really enjoyed the concept of, like, the secret houses with their separate magics, and the watchdog that is constantly fighting against the lure of corruption. And then we have Alex, who is kind of just, like, thrust into this world when her whole world just sort of has just fallen apart. And then I would say that my kind of main critique would be the way Alex handles, there's this one, like, roommate situation where something really terrible happens to her roommate, and Alex kind of, like, well, she does do, like, the good thing of, like, stopping the sort of gossip from spreading, but then she just kind of gets all this revenge that I feel kind of minimizes the impact of that kind of trauma. But we are over onto the next page now. We are going to be working on the setup for Dragon Keeper. So the Rainwild Chronicles is the final series in the realm of the Elderlings greater world that I need to read in order to have read everything. I know I've read it a little bit out of order because I don't remember what the last trilogy is called, but I've already read it, so oh well, it's fine. But we're doing Dragon Keeper now, and actually the next one is going to be for Dragon Haven, and I know that I just posted my November TBR, and I said I was going to read Dragon Haven, but I read Dragon Keeper, and I was not expecting to love it as much as I did, but I immediately started Dragon Haven and finished it. That's the point of that sentence. But yeah, I was kind of feeling like, I don't know, after the Tawny Man trilogy, like, it wasn't my favorite trilogy, so I was like, I don't know if I want to read more Hobb right now, but then I did start Dragon Keeper, and I loved it so much. It was not about the characters I was expecting it to be. Like, I was expecting it to follow Malta and Rain, who are in the Live Ship Traders trilogy, but actually it follows 2 different female leads who I both really loved. Rainwilds is quite a bit different from the Tawny Man trilogy. There's definitely politics, but they very much take a back seat to the characters' personal struggles and relationships, as well as the, like, actual plot. Like, some might say that, like, we start kind of slow, or that things are kind of slow, but to me, I think the pacing is good. I'm very used to slower paced things, and I like it that way. So, as I said, we have the 2 main female characters, which I love to see, and they're both very different in interesting and unique ways. We've got Elise, and she's like a Bingtown trader's daughter, and she thinks she's bought herself this dream life, but throughout the book she slowly realizes that what she's condemned herself to. And then we have Timera, who is an outcast who is desperate to find value in herself and to find a purpose in her life. And I felt that these 2 main female leads make for great perspectives to explore the events and problems that occur in this book. And as I was sort of saying upon completion, I was so excited to start the next one that I had to immediately pick it up, and I read both of these in like 2 days or something. So that's how you know it's a great book, when it just, you have to read the next one right away. Like I was saying about Ninth House, kind of. All right, and then yeah, as I was saying, we're moving on to Dragon Haven. And in terms of the decoration on these spreads, I decided to mostly go for the sort of potion element. And that was kind of because there's like one sort of plot point in these where the Duke of Chalced, he is dying and he wants dragon like blood to heal him. So that's kind of one of the problems that's going on in this whole thing. So I was like, I'll make a little vial and pretend it's like dragon blood. So Dragon Haven, as I said, I was inspired to jump straight into this one after Dragon Keeper, and luckily I enjoyed this one just as much as the first one, maybe even more. Like, the problem with reading them kind of back to back is I will kind of forget the events of one versus the other. Like, they will sort of bleed together in my head. This is the problem that I have with Wheel of Time as well. It's like, I don't really remember what happens in each book because they all just kind of blur together in my head. So that is a little bit of a problem for this one. I'm not totally sure, but I think I have a pretty good idea of the events of one versus the other. And I love how the plot continued in this one. And I felt that the ending was very satisfying as we accomplish like a big goal. And it feels like the first two books are kind of like part one, and then we'll get into a new conflict in the next two books. And as I was saying about like accomplishing a big goal at the end of one of the books, it's like, that's kind of one of the problems that I have with Wheel of Time, is they do occasionally have that, but often it's just like it ends on like a low. So it's kind of frustrating in that way, and I like it when we accomplish something. Like, it doesn't have to be the end goal, but like, it's gotta be like something tangible that I can hold on to and be like, okay, yes, we are moving forward in this story. But yeah, our characters also experience very satisfying arcs. In this installment, we get Elise and Chimera starting to come together and get along, and it's so nice to see female characters being allowed to get along and just like be girlies, you know, because I feel like there are too often female characters are pitted against each other, and whether that's because like they like to make female characters combative for some reason, or because they're like fighting over like some man or something, but we don't have that in this book. They're both kind of, it seems like the dragon, Centera, wants to like pit them against each other to like make them like work harder for her, but you know, that's just Centera. She's a dragon, you know? She has dragon thoughts, and she doesn't look at things through the human lens, which makes sense. She thinks she is like, she's very selfish, I guess you could say, and that is kind of just, I think, supposed to be a dragon characteristic. They're not like wise and benevolent. They're animals. I mean, same as any human is. And I really enjoyed Elise's sort of internal debate where she's kind of fighting against what she's always been, or like told herself that she is, and actually choosing like herself, you know, and trying to discover what it is that she truly wants. And then of course we have Cedric, who becomes kind of a better character in this book, because he starts to realize how mistreated he's been and how he has passed that mistreatment on to Elise. And now he's kind of in a similar position to her, where he's finally choosing for himself what he actually wants and who he wants to be in his life. And then the final book that I read in the month of October was Frankenstein, quite fittingly. I definitely thought that I wanted to read more classics in like sort of fall time. I feel like fall is like the time for classics, and not that November is not still fall, but it's definitely gotten a lot colder, so it feels more wintry almost already. And I'm using a large serif font for the title, similar to what was on the cover of my copy of Frankenstein. There are, of course, like a million different covers, you know, it's been around for a while and it's been pretty popular. And then for my main decoration, I'm just doing a skeletal hand reaching out of the ground. I feel like it's very sort of, think you often see like an image for Frankenstein that's like the kind of like green hand like reaching out of the ground, or maybe that's like specifically for zombies, but either way, I feel like this kind of fits. And yeah, as you can see, unfortunately, I did only give this 3 stars, and I might have even considered giving it slightly less, but I feel like there's like a pressure to like Frankenstein. But unfortunately, I just did not really care for this book. I can't unfortunately force myself to like things that I don't like. I can appreciate that like the writing in this book is very good in terms of like prose and the way that Shelley is using Frankenstein and his monster to make a point. However, I just kind of found it overall a little bit boring. Like when he makes the monster, we don't really get any description of the monster other than like he's tall and grotesque, and pretty much no other description of the science, which I personally was really hoping for. I mean, I did like the way the prologue, letters, and like the ending sort of bookended the story. That was pretty satisfying. But I had a whole problem with like the whole like his parents like adopted a girl like to be his future wife, but then like raised her as his sister, and I don't know, man, that to me is just like really gross. And then he does end up marrying her, and I'm like, ew. I mean, if you were raised with somebody as your sister, kind of feel like that it would be kind of gross to marry her. I don't know, maybe that's just my take, you know. But then we are jumping back to my month in review page to fill that out. And in terms of like reading, it was a pretty good reading month. As I've said, I think I said in the intro that I read like 3,311 pages, which I did. But also in terms of like the quality of the books, the average star rating was 4.4, which is very high. So a lot of good books read this month. And then in terms of pages, my lowest day was 9 pages, and my highest was like 453. And that was actually the final day of reading Fool's Fate. And then actually 9 was the first day that I read Ninth House, so I think I was probably a little burnt out from reading Golden Fool and then Fool's Fate. But yeah, so we are just kind of using the same sort of style from the rest of the spread, you know, black outlines, filling that in. Again, we have my pages by day tracker. Friday was apparently a big reading day. It's funny how it's like kind of like every other day, the peak is like higher. So apparently Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturdays are not it for me. But then we are just going on to fill in my pages read tracker. So the usual stuff going on here, you know, putting in the dates, the book titles, and then I will go ahead and fill in all my bar graphs. I have pre-marked them all out just so that it's easier to fill this in quickly. And I'm just using the darker of the two greens. It is Tombow number, I think it's 173. Unfortunately, the number is like almost totally rubbed off my marker, so, but it does look, it says 173 to me. It could also be an 8 though, so. But yeah, here is a quick flip through of all of the spreads that I made this month. I am pretty happy with how it turned out. I think it worked well. Alright friends, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed hearing about everything that I read this month and seeing the spreads that I created for them. Let me know in the comments what you read in this month or what you thought about the books that I read. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.